Alrighty, we are back, and today I am going to be offering the new era of UFC fans a small taste of nostalgia. Why? Well, because many of you, when you think of UFC, you think of YouTuber influencers.
I can't stress enough just how much more impactful this new damage system is going to be in UFC 5.
Whereas back in the day, they did not exist. Therefore, games had to promote themselves, and they would only sell if they were any good. If I were to tell you that the perfect UFC game already exists, many of you wouldn't have a clue what I'm talking about. And based on the beta footage I have seen of UFC 5, the game in question still remains the greatest UFC game ever made. But let's first make this very clear. I want UFC 5 to be the greatest MMA game ever made because I just bought the deluxe edition. The difference is I refuse to shill to please a naive and casual audience and make a living off of them. So let's take a deep dive and discuss what UFC 5 can learn from the greatest UFC game ever made, UFC Undisputed 3. And we begin with the fundamental ingredient that is missing in every single EA UFC game: responsive inputs. What this means is when you press a button, the action occurs straight away. If I throw a jab, a leg kick, or slip a punch, it's all based on my reactions. I'm not only anticipating what my opponent is going to do, the combat instead is just flowing. My opponent has exactly the same advantage, and therefore matches don't look like a complete mess. UFC 4 and 5, according to beta players, include a delay in their inputs, and I think this is because they're trying to make the players feel more weighted. That is not the way to do it, and therefore all the top ranked players in UFC 4 are relying on anticipating what their opponent's going to do, as well as combinations which, let's be honest, are highly exploitable and make little sense.
Bang. Beautiful, beautiful clip.
We move on to fighter physics. In UFC 5, it is clear that they rely way too much on a physics engine to replicate the impact of strikes landed. Why is Uriah Faber turning his head when hit with a leg kick? Why is Conor moving like an old age pensioner? These physics take away from the immersion in the game. Undisputed 3 relies on manual animations. Whilst not perfect, they make sense and keep you immersed in the game. EA UFC have possibly one of the worst physics engines in a AAA fighting game. The fighters glide across the ring as if strings are attached to their hips. They are not grounded to the floor. Can you see the difference here? Note how their feet are planted to the ground, as they're supposed to be.
Wow! What a thunderous kick!
And that brings us to strike impact. Every strike thrown in Undisputed 3 looks like they've been thrown with intent to hurt. They are impactful. When they land, they act as a deterrent for your opponent. In UFC 5, it is rock'em sock'em robots. When fighters get hit, they swing their whole body back whilst having an epic fit. And that brings me smoothly on to strike effectiveness.
Oh, what a punch!
If you throw the perfect strike in Undisputed 3, and in your mind, that strike has to knock them out, it's more than likely you're gonna knock them out. Precision matters in this game. If you overextend on the outside and I land a flush head kick, it doesn't matter if we're 5 seconds into the game, you might get KO'd. Undisputed also knows how to tally up damage. As Chael Sonnen, I cannot bust a grape. However, if I take you down and inflict damage on your body, you'll clearly see the damage on the side of your rib cage, and even with Chael Sonnen, I can finish you with a body shot, and it will make sense. You will not feel cheated, frustrated, because the game accounts for every scenario and does not hold your hand. UFC 4 and 5 are tailor-made for the idiocracy era we unfortunately live in, giving the majority of Martial Mind fans a second chance, so that everyone's a winner and no one's feelings are hurt and they keep playing the game. In Undisputed 3, your feelings do not matter. Make a mistake, you're gonna pay for it. Therefore, you will get better. We move on to the ground game. Undisputed 3 does not rely on UI prompts because the ground game makes sense. It is intuitive. You don't even need to know the names of ground positions. Want to lift your left leg over your opponent? Down left. Want to move your right leg over your opponent? Down right. How about side mount? Down right again. Everything you've done so far is going around your opponent. But if you want to go on top of your opponent, up left or up right. Here's an example of how quickly I can enter full mount. It's also extremely easy to defend. You simply hold the right stick either right or left, or if you flick the stick right and left as your opponent is doing a transition, you can reverse that transition. In EA UFC, however, you hold either left or right to transition whilst following a UI prompt, because depending on your position, the transition will be different. Of course, you can memorize those transitions, but by default, it's unintuitive. And if you are new to the game, you are going to get completely dismantled by someone who is used to left being right and right being left. Make it make sense, EA. We move on to the campaign mode, and because the AI is so fundamentally solid and appropriately responsive, naturally the campaign mode is solid too. All the usual tropes you expect in a campaign game are here. Create your own character, train in a gym of your choice, and work on your attributes before the big fight. The difference is you can feel the love that's gone into this. When you meet Dana White for the first time, you don't feel like a company man, you feel like a fighter meeting a down-to-earth boss.
That's right, bitches. The biggest and the best fighters in the world, they all come and fight in the UFC.
There's no over-shilling of the company brand. Throughout the campaign, you can choose sponsors, and the further you progress, more sponsors are available to you. And having sponsorships obviously earns you money, which you can invest in your training, and with training, you are encouraged to follow your coach's game plan, meaning you are forced to fight out of your comfort zone. The whole campaign mode is to set you up for multiplayer, and because it's so tough, no matter your skill level, it feels all the more rewarding by the end. The game wants you to know what it feels like to fail, so you know what you need to do to succeed. We move on to fighter lore. Undisputed 3 was meticulously designed to pay homage to every fighter in the game. The small details we know and love of our favorite fighters, when you expect them to happen, they will happen. When the camera approaches Rampage Jackson, you expect him to stare down the camera lens. When Junior Dos Santos approaches the middle of the cage, he points to the center of the ring. If Rashad Evans gets a KO, he will showboat just as he did against Chuck Liddell. In UFC 5, the female featured fighter is Valentina Shevchenko. She predominantly trains at Tiger Muay Thai in Phuket. Yet here we have her wearing a UFC uniform, training at the UFC facility, as well as shilling all over it.
This is the best training facilities of all. There is no place like it.
The trailer shows more interest talking about company man Coach Davis than offering us some insight on Valentina Shevchenko. And just to add, she looks completely different on all 3 occasions she's shown on camera. It's so disjointed and bare-boned. In Undisputed 3, you could sense the passion and excitement the developers had with the intent to create the greatest UFC game ever made.
You know, hooking up with THQ, they're very passionate about the sport, and they created an incredible video game. We talked to EA Sports, and you know what EA Sports said? It's not a real sport. Those aren't real athletes, and we'd never make a video game out of that. So like a typical goofball company, this one comes out and does very well, and they're like, oh, okay, me too. Now it's a sport. These guys are real athletes because we want to make some money off it. EA sucks.
It's likely the EA team know nothing about the fighters they represent. Thus, we get this cookie cutter formula. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button. I will be covering both UFC 5 and Undisputed 3, so do please consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys next week. Peace.